at all. And it's quite possible that they could have done it the day before, as they had postponements. They baked the bread on the day before the Sabbath for the showbread. They did many things a day early just to prevent them from profaning the Sabbath. So if it was profaning the Sabbath and doing this minor task of taking the lamb out of the flock on the Sabbath, or on whatever day that was, they could have done it a day early with no problem if the Sabbath ever fell on the 10th day of the month, because they did that for other things. Whatever happened to fall on a Sabbath, they would do it a day early to prevent from breaking the Sabbath. And keep in mind that this argument that the 10th is a work day because they had to take this lamb out of their flock on that day, to use that argument, this argument can be used with just as much force, even more force, for the 15th day of the 7th month. Because on the 15th day of the 7th month, they were commanded to take boughs of trees and build temporary dwellings. And that is a lot more work than just taking a lamb out of your flock and separating it from the flock. That would be a very simple task compared to going out, gathering sticks and branches, and building yourself a shelter so you can live in that, your family can live in that, for the 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacles. So this just has no foundation. And I would like to go ahead and go to claim number 5. Claim number 5 deals with Jericho. And the claim is that the Israelites were commanded to circle Jericho for 7 consecutive days, which is true. And the claim is that this would be work, so all these days must have been work days, which could only happen with a lunar Sabbath. And so the argument is that on day number 1 of the month is when they went to surround Jericho, and they surrounded Jericho for 7 days, and on the 7th day they surrounded it 7 times, plundered the city, and the claim is that that's the 7th day of the month, and the 8th day was the Sabbath. The following day was the Sabbath, based on a lunar calendar, lunar Sabbath calendar only. That's what this supposition is made. And so the claim is because they marched for 7 consecutive days, those days could not have been Sabbaths. They must have been regular working days. Problem with that is that argument kind of shoots itself in the foot, because this argument shoots itself in the foot because if it is a sin to march around a very small city on the Sabbath, and remember this city was small because on the 7th day they were able to march around that city 7 times and still have time left over to plunder the city. So it was a small city. If it's a sin to march around this small little city on Sabbath, then it is even much more of a sin to gather all of your belongings and set out on a long journey on the Sabbath. Also, if the first day of the month, the new moon day, is not a work day, then they could not have marched around the city on this day either, if this theory is correct. If new moon days are supposed to be days that you can't work, then if they started out and surrounded that city on that day, it would have been a problem too. Now, I would like to go back to Joshua chapter 6 and read verses 3 and 4 there. It says, "And ye shall compass the city, all ye men of war, and go around about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days, and 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets." So that's just the biblical account of how they were to surround the city 7 times, and the 7th day they were to do it seven times and then plunder the city. Now, there is a quote in Jasher, the book of Jasher. It's an apocryphal book. There is some question about whether it's valid. There's some strange things actually in the book of Jasher. You go back and look at it yourself in the book of Jasher. There's one thing that I found quite strange that I can remember at the moment, and that is in the book of Jasher it says that Moses, when he was a teenager, it says specifically, you can check this out for yourself, when Moses was a teenager, it says that he went to Pharaoh and asked Pharaoh for him to give the Jews a day off on Sabbath so that they could rest every 7th day. And it says that Pharaoh, in that book, that Pharaoh granted the petition and gave the Jews the Sabbath off every seventh day they were allowed to rest and didn't have to work, even though they were slaves. That's in the book of Jasher. That seems quite unlikely that would happen. That was supposedly when Moses was a teenager, before he ever went out for the 40 years and learned from his time in the wilderness. And also, it says another thing, that when the Israelites left Egypt, that the Egyptians followed them, pursued them on. First they took 3 days to bury their dead, and then they left and went to follow after Israel. And when they got to Israel, it records a conversation that the Egyptians had with the Israelites, and the Egyptians said, "You told us that you were going to leave on a 3-day journey, and now it's been 5 days since you left, and so we want you to come back and be our slaves again." And the Jews, according to Jasher, they treated the Egyptians roughly, in fact attacked them and sent them back, and the Egyptians went back to Egypt, and they had been lost in battle, and then they got upset and came back again and pursued them, and that's when they went through the River Jordan. The Red Sea. So this is just something that's in Jasher that's quite questionable. There's several other things that are questionable in the book of Jasher, but yet Jasher is used as an authority here. So I would like to quote it. It's at Jasher 88, verse 14. It says, "And it was the 2nd month, on the 1st day of the month, that the Lord said to Joshua, Rise up, behold, I have given Jericho into thy hand, with all the people thereof, and all your fighting men shall go around the city once each day. Thus shall you do for 6 days. So there is the account in Jasher that the beginning for the trip around Jericho was on the 1st day of the month. Now, if this Lunar Sabbath argument is correct, this is the only day that it could have happened. However, if it is not correct, it doesn't matter what day it happened. So if Jasher is right, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't lend any support or evidence to prove that the 7th-day Sabbath could fall on any day of the month, because it could have happened no matter what, whether it was the first day of the month, the 7th day of the month, whenever they left. It didn't matter, because no matter what, there was one of those days that was a weekly Sabbath where they marched around the city, and they could do this without breaking the Sabbath, because regardless of what day they began the Sabbath, it could have fallen on any of the first 6 days without violating any of the commandments of God, because the rule to have a Sabbath day's journey was not biblical. The Sabbath day journey law was not even in the Bible. That was something, it's mentioned in the Bible, but it's a Pharisaical law. It's not a biblical law. So there was no Sabbath day journey prohibition. Them going around a very small city on the Sabbath was not a violation of the law. Although going around the city 7 times and then plundering the city, that would definitely not have been done on the Sabbath. So that's all we know from Jericho, is that the last day was not a Sabbath. Any of the other days could have been a Sabbath without violating the law. Let's look at another claim. Claim number 6 is dealing with the 3rd month. The Bible says that the 15th of the 3rd month the Bible doesn't say this, but this claim is that the 15th of the 3rd month was a Sabbath, because the Israelites came out of Egypt on the 16th, and the 3rd day in Exodus 19 is the 3rd day of the week, the 18th day of the month. Now, just think about that for a second. The idea is that the